hopefully this works.
Just talk up.
Yep, I'll try to speak up as best I can.
Yell!
Yeah!
I can't hear you! Don't fall asleep.
Alright, it's a little past 11, so we can start now. My name is Richard Kenyan. I'm a vExpert 2018-2019. I also co-lead the Buffalo VMUG out of Buffalo, New York, which if you don't know where that is, it's next to Niagara Falls. I've been in IT for about 20 years, give or take a few months, and I work for a company called Synacor. We are a telecommunications company that works directly with cable companies like Suddenlink, CenturyLink, HBO, Comcast, Time Warner. Those are our clients that are taking various services from our company and redistributing them back to their clients, which is basically everybody in the world. We do advertising, content delivery, video delivery, games, widgets, portal pages, and that leads Synacor to also provide email infrastructure for those companies. So when you have a example, a Comcast email address to log in to watch content on various platforms, that email address is hosted by Synacor, either on-premises services or services that are licensed out through Zimbra, it's an email platform, which Synacor also owns. We also do the authentication for NBC Olympics, NHL hockey, and most recently that everybody is aware of, entertainment-wise, Game of Thrones. When you log into your HBO account on either the Go app, your TV, or any of the other Roku or Amazon devices to get HBO content, as soon as you press enter, that hits Synacor's systems and goes back again. If you are not in the telecom industry, you have no idea what we do. It's a direct-to-telecom industry service based out of Buffalo, New York, and we've been in business for about 15 years, maybe longer? No, 20 years at this point, but our business model changed halfway through. So that's what I do. I run the virtualization infrastructure and the storage infrastructure for Synacor. And what our problem was a few years ago is as we brought in clients, because we're multi-tenant, we would get an ingestion of cache, an ingestion of resources, an ingestion of team members, and spin up a new infrastructure for a large client of ours. This ended up being ad hoc as our company went from a startup to an enterprise, and we ended up with different versions of VMware's vCenter product line from spanning about 7 years. So we actually had recently in our environment running prod systems ESX 4.0, ESXi 4.1, 5.0, 5.1, 5.5, and 6.0. And we did that in different colo facilities around our 8 data centers across the world, as well as internal development teams, pre-production, and UAT. And managing all of that was starting to become a pain as we became more enterprising. So this is how I got from that environment to the new environment of, at the time, 6.5 U1, but it's irrelevant at this point. 6.5 U1 and 6.7 U2, it's just click and you hit an update button. It's about the same way. So our goals for this project were get everything to the new VCSA, which is the VMware way of doing things now. We wanted to maintain our VM uptime as best as possible because we didn't have the spare resources to spin up a new greenfield environment at the same time we were keeping our other environments up and online. We wanted some very specific features of the new 6.5 deployment methodology. We wanted single sign-on for everything because we had Windows boxes all over the place. We had local users on our Windows boxes that weren't AD auth. We had different groups on different servers that were AD auth, and it was a nightmare to try to figure out which user went where when they needed to log into the vCenter. We also wanted a very specific piece, which is VMware's HA orchestrated restart, which is built into 6.5 and 6.7 now, where you can assign a group of VMs to be restarted in the case of an HA event in a specific order. So your DNS servers and time servers come up before your AD servers. They come up before the web servers, which come up before the database servers, and we worked with our other teams in order to get that in place, and that was another big selling point. We definitely wanted to decrease licensing for that guy right there. and that guy right there, and that guy right there. And you can see by nuking Oracle databases, Microsoft SQL databases, our licensing sprawl for just running VMware's product line decreased drastically. And on top of that, since we're all technology folk in here, troubleshooting Windows vCenters was time-consuming, problematic, and very, very difficult. So we were very happy when VMware decided to go to an integrated web app. We also wanted to get rid of tech debt. As I said, we had different standards for different servers. We had Windows 2003 boxes still in play. We had a lot of very old environmental pieces from many different projects along the way from our startup, and we wanted to take this opportunity to nuke it all and get it up into place. And because we have a systems administration team that runs CentOS as our service to our clients, they also run Linux boxes as their work machines. They also run Macs as their work machines. They also have Windows boxes as their work machines for other different projects that they work on. So every time they needed to log into a vCenter, they had to RDP to a Windows box or launch the thick client. Or if they had a newer version of vCenter, they could use some of the Flash client, but they couldn't use it on the Linux box, so the Linux Flash client didn't. It's the big sprawl of VMware's past 5 years was very difficult on them. So standardizing onto the HTML5 client helped out that team immensely. They could log into the interface off of any laptop, off of any tablet, anytime they wanted to by just going to a web URL. And this is where we were. And I'm going to take a second and be quiet and actually let you absorb what this actually is. And it was what I just explained, and it was very difficult to manage. If you take a look down there, we found, in the process of doing this, a pre-production environment that was on a physical HP DL360 Gen 7 that had Windows installed on it, named VCO1.preprod, which was the DNS server for vc.preprod, which was a VM in Hyper-V installed with Windows, installed with vCenter, that ran for 3 years and nobody found it. Physical box, Microsoft Windows DNS, that had Hyper-V on it, that we used to make a VM that had Windows on it, that got VMware installed on it and ran the pre-production environment. And it sat that way for 3 years and nobody noticed. And I didn't do that. My predecessor had done that due to the requirement at the time that auto-deploy required a DNS environment that was Windows-based. And the project got forgotten about, and when I came on board, I went to vc.preprod.local and went, oh, here's my environment, and I just went from there. So when I went and did this project, I went, what the hell is that? And we also had, as I said, ESX original in prod, and it was just a mess. And it was so difficult, and everything was so buggy, and we went, we're done. Let's get off of this. And because I don't have my notes, this is where we wanted to end up going, which is much cleaner, much more useful, and a lot more auditable and able to be utilized by our teams much more properly. You can set a role here and it migrates all the way around. You can set a permission here and it doesn't matter where you go, because the single sign-on domain is one, go to enhanced link mode and you're done and it just worked. Now I know since 6.7 U2 came out that they depreciated the external platform service controller. We are still running in this environment until we get to 6.7 U2, which brings those back in. But for the purpose of this project, this is what the supported methodology was at the time, and that's how we went and had to go through it. And the way that you get from here to there is export everything. If you have a legacy install base and it's not documented, you have to find things like the vCenter Hyper-V, vCenter, loop. You have to find things like you run an ESX with, the root password hasn't been changed in 3 years. This is a good time to take your time and audit your technical debt, to audit your documentation, to make maps and to do things piece by piece. It's not just we want to get from here to there. Take the time and take the opportunity to do it right if you're going to do a project of this size. So what we ended up doing for the export process is we used RV Tools, and if you are not familiar with that product, it's completely free, and it has been free since the gentleman coded it. It's sponsored by any number of IT sponsors. You dump in a fake email address and you get the download. It helps him out to get money to run the site, but it literally exports everything out of your environment into pre-populated Excel fields. Some people know about the tool, some people don't. I have it linked on my GitHub page if you can't remember it, so the only thing you really need to know is I have a GitHub page and all of this is in there, so if you miss something I say, that's where it all is. But RV Tools is extremely helpful on a day-to-day basis. You can set up batch files and run everything out of it, and if you have no documentation, that's the perfect starting point. We had networking set up for DV switches because we had 250 ESX hosts in our environment, 6,000 VMs. DV switches were the way to go as each of our deployments went through. Once that feature got released in 4.1, it made managing VLANs a lot easier for us because we're multi-tenant. We exported all the VMware kernels, all the port groups, and then we moved the VMware network default port group out because you didn't really use it. It's just the default group that they gave you because they were being helpful back in the old days. We then had to move the hosts. So you then have to disconnect the host from one to another, and then you have to update ESX as time goes on. So the way that we did that was we took all of our DV switches and removed them. We put all of our hosts back onto standard switches. We put all of our VMs back onto standard switches. We disconnected the ESX from the old version of vCenters that we had and then upgraded them as standalone hosts to the highest we could go from the jump that we were going to. So if we were at 4.1, we updated to 5.1. If we were on 5.0, we updated to 5.5. We needed to double jump. And we dumped all of those hosts into a jump vCenter called VCO2 6.0 because 6.0's vCenter was the one that could read all of the 5.5 environments and all of the 6 environments up until 6.0 U3. So that was a good place to take the old stuff to get it up to a point where we could then get it up to the new stuff without having to be without a vCenter for too long. We then moved all the VM kernels. We had 8 NICs, 1 gig each, on each host that we had in our environment. So we took 4 of them, the odds, and put them on the standard switches. Then put the VMs on those standard switches. Then took the evens and put them on the standard switches and then got rid of the DV hosts. Now all your hosts are standalone ESX hosts. Now they can be a little bit more malleable when you're moving around environments back and forth. And we did all of that with PowerCLI, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Then once you are off there, you can use PowerCLI to then update your hosts because you don't have the infrastructure update manager anymore. It's just not there because you don't have it attached to a vCenter anymore. So we took HP's ESX deployment images and we allowed them and tested them because apparently HP doesn't. When they do QE testing, they have bad drivers in there. Yay! So we went through all of that audit process as well and made custom ISOs for all of our hosts and just kind of deployed them one at a time. And then there are gotchas that I wanted to basically, this is why I started to make this presentation, was if you have a slash, because there's a slash networking character, that's how you delineate your subnets. You just type in slash and it goes from there. If you have that anywhere in your DB port group names, you will end up in the database with the URL encoding of that. And then when you screw it up, it goes get VM network returns this, but create VM port group creates that. And then the database puts that back in, and then your UE makes that. It's like, it's literally something that you would never realize until you actually go and run PowerCLI, that's actually not a standard character inside of VMware's naming convention. And it still isn't on 6.7. And I still have a bug in to fix that thing. So I like telling people about it because we just went through and changed all of our slashes to underscores, and then you don't need to worry about it. But it's stupid because that's what it is. Also, don't get too over-enthusiastic when you do this. We ended up, in the middle of this whole 6-month project, had a requirement for new hosts in one of our clusters because we were running out of resources. Just that's where the overlap came in the graph of time to do the project versus time to deploy resources. So we deployed our new hosts into our old vCenters. And we deployed a HP Geo 9, and it does not like ESX 5.0 until you go to vMotion something off of it. It works perfectly fine. It adds itself to the host. HP's ISO works perfectly fine. There's no errors. We admittedly did not test it because it just worked. And we put all our VMs on it, and things went perfectly fine for about 3 or 4 weeks until I went to hit that cluster in this project, and couldn't get the VMs off of it. The enhanced vMotion capability for the chip architecture in here does not like the ability to go off of it. So 160 VMs went on 3 hosts, and we couldn't get them off because I didn't check the compatibility list. So we then had to take a separate downtime, which is the only downtime that we did in this project, to power off those 3 hosts, take all the VMs, turn them all off, and then put them on the proper hosts, pull those out, and then wait until we got the project completed before we put those new hosts back in with a properly supported version of vCenter. So we, admittedly, we did all of our documentation, but we are a small group. We got too excited and we went, oopsie, downtime, boom. So that happens. And one of the things that are broken in 6.5, as we were doing all of our exporting and things like that, is there's an undocumented UI error in the new feature of the backup and restore utility in the 6.5 VAMI. What happens is when you go to restore SCP, it needs a double / after the server name and not before it. So whenever we typed in the URL to our server name, it just wasn't working, and I went on the community's website and went, why is this not working? And somebody else had figured that out first. So that's just a gotcha if you didn't really know about it. So all of this took about 3 months to do, and one of the things I just added the presentation based on a survey question from the last time I gave this presentation was this is how many teams I actually had to work with. It wasn't just the infrastructure team doing this by ourselves. We had to go and talk to each one of these teams and sell the change that we were doing to them because they didn't understand why we had to spend new support licensing, new ELA to get to supported versions of VMware, because there was a disconnect in communication from going to a startup company to an enterprise company. That got fixed as time went on, but we had to go and talk to our VPs to get finance to agree to spend money, to make security happy, to make the direct managers understand that the operations center needs to, it's just like you bounce back and forth between everything. And the key to doing this is having a small company, which I'm very well aware that some people don't work at. What we ended up doing was something different that I hadn't heard in the Western New York area, is our change control team actually assigned us a project management person. And that person worked with me on a every other day basis to go through and do maintenance windows, to go through and set up meetings with our security team, to go through and set up meetings with our system administration team because their workflows were going to change for the better, to go through all of the new features of VMware and things like that. Our development workflow model needed to change because they had written custom PowerCLI, Perl scripts, Ruby scripts. They had built their own little interface talking to vCenter on their cluster and their vCenter, that we would have to take that system down and have them make SDK changes when we upgraded all of the versions from, you know, very old versions to very new versions. So we had to work with them. We had to make sure all of our new network names and DNS names were all taken care of. And then once all of that was finally working and everything was gelling, then we got hit with the audit about, well, how are you documenting all of these changes? You're not just going to put every little itty-bitty change you make to every VM inside a change control ticket. It's not feasible. Is there another way for you to do this? And I went, yes, console output. And they're like, console output? I go, every command that I run with these scripts is outputted to the PowerShell console here. It's literally timestamp. This is the command I run. Here's the result. Here's an error. Stop. Timestamp. Here's the command I run. Here's, and they're like, you can do that? I go, yeah, just it's a little caret. Output. And that 6.5 meg text file that is the result of all these scripts, I just put into the change control ticket and said, see timeline documentation. So if anything went wrong, if anything was, you know, questioned, we can go back in time from the announcements in our knock channel in our chat room, to the announcement of the change control, to the announcements of the tickets, and then graph them to figure out, oh, this VM got this network moved at this time that caused this alert because the product wasn't aware that the IP changed. Things like that. So I did think of making sure to appease all of these teams, and this was honestly about 40% of my work. It wasn't the technology research, it wasn't the VMware SEs and the VMware client executive coming in and, you know, doing the ELA. It was mostly trying to sell VMware upgrades to this amount of people. And we had, I think I was, at one point, the biggest meeting we had was 40 people, like the week before, and I had to give the whole presentation. I'm basically giving you now of why to go from unsupported to supported, but we're all IT, we all know why you have to do that. So I want to show you some of the scripts that I used, and again, another reason I put this presentation together was because I couldn't find all of the pieces that I needed in one place. I found all of these pieces in a bunch of different places in the VMware community, and then ended up putting them all together and realized other people might be able to benefit from it because I couldn't find it. So the way that we do it is the same way that I just told you. We do the port groups that are on the DV switches. Sorry, it's just not my laptop. The port groups that are on the DV switches, we create port groups on empty blank standard switches. PowerCLI it all, and this is the script that does that. It goes through VM by VM, not network by network, because it's a little scary when you actually do this in prod. You can fill in your variables, you can get which switch is the old switch, which switch is the new switch, which cluster you want, dump them all into an array, and I've got each line specifically commented if you are not a programmer. And I am not a programmer. I can read code, I can put code together, I understand what code does by looking at it and running it, but if you ask me to come up with things like this on my own, it's outside my skill set. I just don't have that technology background of programming to actually pull in libraries and make outputting scripts. As I do it line by line, and I commented it out for people like myself who do scripting, who do PowerCLI stuff, who do reporting, who do things at an ad hoc method, but still need to understand what a very large script like this is doing. So if you want to just cut out all the green stuff because you can read PowerCLI like you read English, great. If you don't, take an hour and read through what you're actually doing, so I commented everything for a general audience. And that's part one. So part two is, now I need to get all of the VDS NICs onto the standard switches that I just created. So like I said, I had 8 NICs in each ESX host that we had. I took 4, moved them, and this script does that. And this script actually came from William Lamb, and I literally just added a few lines that was custom to my environment and went from there, and it worked perfectly. This is, I grabbed it straight from him, and it worked perfectly fine. Now, step 3 is, now that there's NICs on the standard switch, it's been tested, the nicknames are all the same. Now you need to match up the old nicknames with the new nicknames, and I just chose MIG. We named them exactly the same, we just put MIG in front of it. This way I had an Excel sheet with all the VM names from the DV switch, an Excel sheet with all of the VMs with the new name, and just went, take these and put them here, and it worked great. And again, this also came from another community member. There's 2 pieces in here. Gabe's Virtual World, which I haven't met this person in public, but this script was one of the ones that I first found that made me find all the other ones. And he's the one who does the Excel sheet that audits everything. What's the old name, what's the new name, what's the IP, what's the VLAN, and it was incredibly helpful. And I just took it, made some modifications to it, and also realized you can reverse it. So once you've done everything and you have a brand new 6.5 or 6.7 vCenter, and now you have to put all the pieces back together, literally run his script in the backwards order, and it puts all the VMs and all the VM kernels back to where they're supposed to be, which I found out while doing this and made a comment of it. So now that we've got halfway through, here's the reverse of that, which is the same person. Again, I just reversed the code. And these scripts aren't long. They're maybe 150 lines, and a good majority of that is all the comments explaining what everything does, and references if you're learning PowerCLI and what things do and why you should do it one way and why I chose to do it one way, which is always helpful when you're trying to go through other people's code. Then I went through, I did actually the other part of it. Yep, these are the Williams Lamb script again. This is the evens moving off the DV switches because there's nothing there. And at the end of this script, it actually removes the DV switch from the host, so you don't have to do it automatically. Or you don't have to do it manually for all of your hosts. It just, as you're at this point, there's no VMs on it, there's no VM kernels on it, just nuke the host from the DV switch and you're fine. So then I went on and I disconnected everything from vCenter, and I grabbed this from another community website. As you start researching PowerCLI and things like that, you'll notice Luke D, which is Luke Denkin's name, come up a very large portion of the time. He's a guy who doesn't sleep, and he reads PowerCLI like you and I speak English. He just understands it from a very technical level and can break it down in a very easy level for people on the VMware forums. And that's where I grabbed this from. So I'm not taking credit for other people's work. I'm just putting all the pieces together so that anybody can go to my GitHub page and use it as they need to. And then that's how to remove it. And then we went to HP's wonderful way of doing things. So as I found out, HP's quality assurance team doesn't really exist anymore. So as we started to upgrade and pull HP's custom images from their website, we found three different drivers of QLogix HBAs that were bad. And we didn't know they were bad until you do the dry run of installing it, because, you know, we're a limited team. We only tested on certain ones, and they happen to not have the QLogix cards in them. And as we moved on, we went, oh crap, we have to rebuild the custom ISO. This tells you how to do that, and then deploys it in PowerCLI fashion to make your own depot. You can interactively put your hosts into maintenance mode or not. You can put them in there fine, and then it goes through and goes, here's what you're actually going to run on your ESX host. You know, this HP update is the one that you fixed above if there's an error. Dry runs it to make sure it runs, dumps that output to the console, goes through, really make sure you want to do it, and there's really only 3 values that you have to change. And we found that this particular script worked so well, we actually haven't reinstalled vSphere Update Manager yet. It's just whenever a new version from HP comes out, we test it on a subset of our hosts to make sure there's no further errors from their QE department, and then we just punch in the variables here, and it just works. And we don't have a reason to use Update Manager past this script, but I'm not telling you to use this script. It's just another option for your toolbox that you want to use, and it worked great for us because it's very, very speedy on a 10 gig network. It just works and does everything perfectly fine. Rerun your reconnect and disconnect so you don't have to go through all of your tools and doing that. There's credential files in here that you can set up and do things. I grabbed this from William Lamb's site as well. He goes through how to add credentials to adding things back and forth so you don't have to type in the root password 150 times, and just makes your life a lot easier. And then part of the exporting is one of the coolest scripts I have ever found in my career, from Luke Denkins, actually. I actually went up and thanked him in person a number of times at the VMworld because this script saved me hours. Our development vCenter has 900 VM folders, and in there 1,300 subfolders, because the tool that our development environment wrote and created against the VMware's SDK is a quick little interface to deploy VMs, and it works great for them. The way that that's quoted is based on their LDAP credentials, which is based on the username in a folder and then their VMs and how much RAM they get. So in our what we called Opal environment, there were 900 folders at the root level and 1,300 subfolders in those folders that as you switch vCenters, how do you rebuild that? You can do it by hand, which we did one time and went never again. And I found this from Luke, and it literally takes your entire folder structure and dumps it into Excel, along with which VMs are in which subfolder. Our vTools does not do that, even though it gives you the location. It just adds it per line for your VM about where it is, but it doesn't give you a way to import it or export it. So this I ran, and it took 9 hours, because it just goes VM by VM and figures out if the folder's there or not from the spreadsheet from the old vCenter, rebuilds it and puts the VM into the folder once all your VMs are there, and it works wonderfully. I understand that there may be one person in the world that this benefited, and it was me, but it's one of the coolest pieces of PowerCLI I've ever seen, because it just worked. And literally I watched the command prompt run for 9 hours in a maintenance mode in a quota downtime and went, I'm literally sitting here watching a progress bar for 9 hours, eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, watching a movie, not having to work. It was just amazing. Blew me away. And the code itself is like 10 lines. If that, if parent here, make parent. If parent not there, make parent in sub, and that's it. And that saved me 9 hours of work. If you've ever had the question of, does automation actually work? Yes, it does. And that is up on my GitHub page, and that's basically it. But I want to stop the screen recording because I want to show you the actual audit process.